Hello, good afternoon, or good whatever the time is when you're watching this. But anyway, I'm glad you're watching this video. So in this video today, I'm going to talk about the topic of death, and more specifically, I'm going to talk about why death is a bad thing. So before I start, I want to say a couple of things to clear things up, just so we know exactly what we are talking about. So the first thing is I want to make a distinction between the badness of death versus the badness of dying. What happens is that when many people say that they are afraid of death, what they are really afraid of is the process of dying. So people would say things like, I'm really afraid of death because I think it's going to be long and painful. So I hope to be able to, I hope that when I die, the death will come in a way that is neither painful nor premature. And that's understandable. That's wonderful. However, when these people talk like that, they are really afraid of the process of dying rather than death itself. So what we are talking about today, what I'm interested in talking about today, is not so much the process of dying, but death itself. Here's the deal. So if you, assuming that there is no afterlife, assuming that we all just cease to exist after death, the question then is this death a bad thing? Is this eternal nothingness a bad thing? Is it something to be feared? Or is any fear of this thing ultimately an irrational and ill-founded fear? So these are the questions that I want to explore in this video. Unfortunately, I don't have to invent the wheel from scratch, because there are at least 3 philosophers throughout history that have said something interesting about this. And these 3 philosophers are the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, Nagel, the American philosopher Thomas Nagel, and the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. So what I'm going to do today is to briefly discuss what these 3 philosophers have to say about death, and whether we are justified in fearing it. So let's start with Epicurus. So Epicurus famously said that we have nothing to fear from death. Why? Because when you are alive, you are existing, so you are not dead yet, so death hasn't done anything to you. And once you are dead, you are no longer around, you no longer exist, so there is nothing for death to harm. So you see, one way or the other, that your death cannot harm you. When you are alive, death hasn't touched you, you're not dead, and then when you're dead, you're no longer around, so death can't possibly touch you, for the simple reason that there is no you for death to touch. So one thing to think about would be to think about what motivates Epicurus to put forth such an interesting view. I think there are 3 main reasons why Epicurus would have this view about death. And the first reason is Epicurus observes that there is an asymmetry between birth and death. Think about it this way. So before you were born, you did not exist. After you are dead, you do not exist either. Right now you do not fear or lament the time that you did not exist. So suppose you were born in 1980, you're not fearful of the fact that you didn't exist before 1980. You do not lament the fact that you did not exist before 1980. It doesn't fill you with any fear. So Epicurus would say, look, if you did not exist before you were born, and you had no fear of the time before you were born, then why should you have any fear of the time after you are dead when you also do not exist? So if you do not fear the time, if you do not fear not being around before you were born, then you have no reason to fear not being around once you are dead. So Epicurus would say, because of this, Epicurus would say that we have this irrational, asymmetrical attitude towards birth and death. If we do not fear the time before we are born, then there is no reason to fear the time after we are dead. They should be both the same. The other reason is that there is no identifiable subject of harm. There is no identifier person for death to harm. As I said earlier, once you are dead, you are no longer around. So if you are no longer around, there is nothing for death to harm. So it is, Epicurus would say it is very foolish and irrational to fear death because there is no identifiable you for death to harm once you're dead. And then the third reason that motivates Epicurus' view is the idea that there is simply no experience of death. The idea is that in order for something to harm you, you have to experience it. It has to be something that you experience. So, for example, if you have gone through a bad relationship, you can say that a bad relationship has harmed you because you have experienced this bad relationship. If you have eaten something that tastes horrible, you can also say that you have been harmed by this experience because you experienced the taste, the food that you taste. However, death is, well, you don't get to experience death again for the simple reason that you are not around when you're dead. So if you're not around when you're dead, if you never get to experience death, then how can it possibly harm you? So for all these three reasons, Epicurus thinks that it is irrational to fear death. We really have no reason to fear death because it cannot possibly harm us. Okay, so this is, so far I've covered Epicurus' views for why he thinks that we have no reason to fear death, why he thinks that death ultimately cannot harm us. Let me talk about Thomas Nagel's response to Epicurus. Nagel is motivated by this very simple impulse. He thinks that there is something lacking in Epicurus' view because we instinctively fear death, and we don't just fear the process leading up to death. When most people say they fear death, they're not just saying that they fear the pain that leads up to it or the suffering that leads up to it. They really do fear not being around. But why? Do we have a good reason to fear not being around? Nagel's response is yes. So he thinks that Epicurus is wrong. Nagel's response is yes, we do have a reason to fear not being around, and the reason is because when we are, when we die, we are being deprived of all the things that life offers us. So there's one very interesting example that Nagel uses to illustrate his point. So let's use me as an example. He calls this a brain injury example. So let's use me as an example. So suppose I suddenly suffer this horrible accident, and I get a horrible brain injury, which reduces me to the mental state of a 3-month-old. But let's just suppose that I have a very good insurance policy, so there is somebody who is taking care of me in my severely mentally damaged state. All my needs are taken care of. I'm well fed. Somebody is bathing me all the time. Somebody is changing my diapers all the time. So all my needs are being met. Now, would you say that I have suffered a misfortune, even though I seem to be happy in this, in this reduced mental state? Nagel would say, yes, I have indeed suffered a misfortune, because even though I'm not aware of having suffered any misfortune, it is still true that I have been deprived of all the experiences and all the things that I would have been able to do if I hadn't been, mentally disabled. So Nagel would say, in response to Epicurus, that first, that there really is an asymmetry between the time before birth and the time after death. And the difference is this: we have no reason to fear or lament not being born earlier, because we didn't lose anything. But we have reason to fear being dead, because being dead deprives us of things that we already have. So even though the time before birth and the time after death are both times in which we do not exist, the latter, the time after death, is actually a worse time for us than the time before birth, for the simple reason that after death, that death deprives us of certain things that we have reason to be fearful and lamenting about. And as to the idea that there is no identifiable subject of harm, again, Nagel disagrees with Epicurus because, again, if you look at the, if you think about the brain injury case, the case of me who's mentally disabled, there is actually there is actually a subject of harm, and that subject is me. What happens is that you know, even though I'm not there to experience the harm actually the brain injury actually harms me by depriving me of certain experiences. So by the same token, death also deprives me of certain experiences. You can even say, I think Nagel would even say that, there's a sense in which death actually reaches back to harm the person who's still living by depriving him of certain experiences that he would have had if he had lived longer. And which brings us to the third point. You know, remember Epicurus said that death cannot possibly harm you because you cannot possibly experience it. Well, Nagel would disagree with this as well. He would say there are some things in this world that can harm you even if you never experience death, and death is one of them. If you don't agree with this idea, think about something else that is not there. So suppose somebody is saying something about you, it's not saying something bad about you behind your back. Now, even if you know nothing about this thing, even if you don't know nothing about this, I think we can still say that you are still being harmed by somebody saying something about you behind your back, even if you never get to learn about it. So in the same way, death can actually harm you, even if you never get to experience it yourself. So Epicurus would say, I'm sorry, not Epicurus, Nagel. Now Nagel would say that, you know, using the brain injury example, he would say that Epicurus is quite wrong. That in fact death is something that can harm us, even though we are never actually there to experience it. Okay, so far so good. So let's move on to the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. So Jean-Paul Sartre has this very famous, you know, a very famous thing to say about death. He said that to be dead is to be prey for the living. So once you are dead, there's a sense in which you become like a, you know, you become like a piece of dead meat for a bunch of vultures who are the living. Well, how does this work out? Well, he makes a very interesting observation. You know, the difference, according to him, the difference between being living and being dead is that when you are living, when you are alive, you get to define who you are. You get to define who you are. You get to respond to what people say about you or what people think about you. Whereas once you are dead, you basically become this inactive piece of furniture. You become this inactive piece of furniture that is incapable of responding or reacting to what people say about you. So, well, one example, think about me, use me as an example. So, you know, you might think that I'm not a very good philosopher, and I might disagree with you by, you know, showing you videos that I've made, things that I've said in class, or maybe even papers that I've written. So long as I'm alive, I can respond to whatever you think or say about me. But imagine if I were to die tomorrow. If I were to die tomorrow, then, you know, then everybody else who's living gets to define who I am, not just as a philosopher, but as a person. They can say I'm a great philosopher, or I'm a bad philosopher because of such and such reasons. They can also say I'm a bad person because of such and such reasons, and there will be nothing I can do about it for the simple reason that I wouldn't be around. So if you look at it in this way, it might seem at first glance that Sartre actually agrees with Nagel that that death can harm us even after we are dead. But I think if you think that, I think that will be too hasty, because Sartre has other things to say about death as well. Sartre thinks that death is different from any other human experience. Why? Because actually death is not, according to him, death is not even really a human experience. Death is the one thing that is outside of all human experience. Why? For the simple reason that, you know, you won't be around after you are dead. You don't get to experience, you never get to experience being dead. So this is one point. The other point is that, you know, we might be able to think while we are alive, we might be able to think about what it is like after we are dead, or we might think about how we might die. So maybe I might fantasize about, I might fantasize about living to a ripe old age and then dying with my family members around me, which would be wonderful. But first, that might not happen because life is unpredictable. And secondly, even if that were to happen, it would be purely a case. It will just be purely my good luck, my good fortune. I don't have any control over whether it happens. And even if it happens, it probably wouldn't happen in the way that I envision it. I might fantasize about being really happy, lying on a deathbed and passing away peacefully, but maybe the truth is that I would be totally incapacitated. I would have no control over my bowel movements. I'll be this horrible, filthy mess. So that kind of death might be really horrible, despite despite my expectations. Anyway, long story short, Sartre is saying that you can expect your death, but you can never really wait for it, because you can only wait for something that is within your experience. So I can wait to, if I have plans to have dinner with a friend, I can wait to have dinner with my friends and anticipate what that dinner is going to be like. And then after that dinner is over, I can go tell other people what I feel about that dinner. But death doesn't work this way. You can never wait for death. You can never anticipate it, because it is outside your experience. It is outside all human experience. So you might have a certain picture of how your death will be like, but that picture will probably not be the real picture of death. It will not be the real death that you actually experience. So Sartre would say that it is a fantasy to think that you can somehow prepare for your death by waiting for it, anticipating it. It is a fantasy because what you are actually preparing for is just a vision, an idealized image of what your death should be like. The real death, the one that actually happens, is something that you will never be able to prepare for. Again, because it is outside all human experience. So if you think about it this way, then what Sartre is saying when he says that to be dead is to be a prey for the living, he's really actually saying that after you are dead, there's a sense in which you do become a prey for the living, but the you that is still around, the you that people are talking about after you are dead is no longer the you that's around right now. It's only just a shell of you. So if after I'm dead, people say that I'm a horrible philosopher, they're not really talking about me. They're talking about the shell, whatever it is that remains of me. They're based on my works or things that I have written. So ultimately, I think that Sartre would agree with Epicurus that death doesn't really harm me, not the me that's still living here. Anyway, it doesn't harm the me that's still living here. If it harms anything, it only harms the shell that remains after I'm gone, after I'm dead. So I think ultimately Sartre will agree with Epicurus that that death really doesn't touch me. It really doesn't harm me, because for the simple reason that death is always outside all possible human experience. So I think that ultimately, Sartre is in agreement with Epicurus. So Sartre and Epicurus are in one camp. They believe that death ultimately doesn't touch you, it doesn't, and therefore doesn't harm you. Whereas Thomas Nagel is in the opposite camp. He tries to make a good and interesting argument that that death actually does harm us. So who's right? Sartre and Epicurus or Nagel? I haven't quite decided myself actually. But maybe I shouldn't try to tell you who's right and who's wrong. In any case, I would like you to perhaps take some time to think about this for yourself. All right, I think that's enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you soon. Bye.